Welcome to the sixth episode of the From a Certain Point of View podcast. I'm Josh.
I'm Adam.
And Adam, I got to tell you, I'm really excited to be talking Star Wars with you today. I feel like I'm going through some Star Wars withdrawals. It's been a while, I feel,
It
even though
feels
it's
like it's
been,
been forever. I mean, we just put a show out last week, but that's been over a week ago now.
yes, it feels like it's been a long time. And my excitement about Star Wars is just going through the roof at this point.
We were talking pre-show. There's just been so much this week
yeah.
to read and to keep up with, and man, it's
Yeah,
ramping up.
lots of stuff to keep up with, and a couple things have fallen a little bit by the wayside, but just with getting geared up for the Rise of Skywalker and everything.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and talk about what we've been watching and reading and playing in Star Wars this week. Do you want to get us started with that?
Yeah. So this week's been a little bit of a busy week for me. Other outside of Star Wars, we mentioned last week I was on vacation, and
Mm-hmm.
while I was, what was really cool actually was being because so a little bit of insight into my personal life. I work at home, so I don't get out very much. But being out in the real world and like talking to people, Mandalorian is everywhere, dude. Like
Oh
you
yeah, it
can't go
is. Yeah.
anywhere. I was checking into the hotel when I got to Florida. I was talking to the front desk lady about Baby Yoda. I mean, and then last night I was at a dinner for work, and my coworkers started talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Everywhere you go, Mandalorian is everywhere, and it's so
Yeah.
much fun to talk about.
It is. I think Baby Yoda has united us all, whether we love or hate The Last Jedi
Yeah, and it's
or
people that
anything.
just don't
Um,
normally watch Star Wars. It's
yeah, even
everybody,
the
you know?
general
Yeah,
population. And
yeah.
I've everywhere I go, I hear about Baby Yoda. I mean, at work too. The teachers talk about Baby Yoda. I had my security SRO, the security resource officer at the school that I work at. He came up to me. He's like, "Hey, I've been watching the Manchurian," and I was like, "You mean the Mandalorian?" And he's like, "Yeah, the Mandalorian." I'm like, "Yeah, it's
Manchurian.
great."
That's a different movie.
Yeah, I was like, is he telling me he's watching the Manchurian Candidate or the
Yeah.
Mandalorian? But we got to the bottom of it. It was the Mandalorian, and it's just like you said, it's everywhere, and I love that it's uniting everybody and just getting behind this adorable Baby Yoda.
This sweet little 8 pound,
Little
6 ounce
Talladega Nights reference.
baby Yoda. Yeah.
Yes.
So what about you? What have you been up to in Star Wars this week?
Um, the main thing I've been diving back into the movies, and
Okay,
this past
great.
since we talked last, Brittany and I sat down and watched The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi again, which
Okay.
still to this day are my two favorite Star Wars movies.
Yup.
Um, and I just love them so much. I've been listening to the soundtracks or the scores for those movies as well. And
Okay.
someday I'd like to talk to you about what your favorite Star Wars scores are. Actually,
Oh,
I
that'd
think
be a fun. Yeah, that'd be a fun
a good
conversation.
topic.
Yeah.
Um, but I couldn't help but have these questions in my mind after watching Empire and Return of the Jedi, like these questions that I want answered in
Mhm.
the Rise of Skywalker. That I don't know if we'll get these answers or not, but I really want to know, like, after seeing Luke's severed hand and the lightsaber, falling through the skies of Bespin, like, how did Maz get that lightsaber? Um,
Mhm.
it is just a question that I have, and I don't know if we'll get the answer, but I want that answer. And also, just like, seeing Vader's armor and body being burned at the end of Return of the Jedi, like, how did
Mhm.
Kylo Ren end up with the helmet? Um, and then just once again seeing Palpatine go down that very large shaft and like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
explosion that happened, like, how did he survive? How is he back?
Yeah.
So I think it really prompted all these questions that I wouldn't mind having answers to.
Right. Yeah, and speaking of watching the movies again, I think we've mentioned this on the show, but I picked up a new TV last week for Black Friday. I kind of caved when I probably shouldn't have, but I did.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
And seeing all of these remastered in Disney Plus in 4K is just like watching them all over again.
It really is like watching them for the first time. Like, Brittany has told me so many times, like, I didn't even notice that before. Like, look how
Yeah,
dirty R2D2 is.
yeah,
Look the little details and things you can
I,
pick up on.
yeah. I
Pretty
rewatched
awesome.
Revenge of the Sith, and man, that opening battle scene
Yeah.
in 4K with with the HDR and all that stuff. It just makes you see it all over again.
Oh
And
yeah, it's been
yeah,
awesome going back through.
yeah,
Um, and then the only other thing I finished Resistance Reborn, so now we can
awesome.
have go through a full review of that novel. And I guess my biggest questions coming out of that was, where do Leia and the Resistance go from here?
Hmm.
Um, and it seemed like they were alluding to this base they're going to,
Hmm.
um, and eventually finding a kind of a home base, a place of sanctuary. And it's for me like a lot of the names of the planets in Rise of Skywalker have been released or come out in some way. But for some reason, that planet in the beginning that we see, the jungle planet where Rey's training and probably the base is, um, why has that been kept from us? And I keep wanting it to be Endor, and I don't know if it's going to be
Yeah,
Endor, but um, you know,
I
is it
hope
is
it's
it
just
possibly
Endor.
Endor? So yeah,
I think we'll get into this a little bit later because I wanted to touch on this again.
right.
Uh, in the Mandalorian segment that we'll be jumping into in a little bit, but
Yeah,
I
definitely.
hope it's Endor.
Yeah, me too. I like going back to familiar planets sometimes. So,
Yeah,
um,
yeah, definitely.
anything else with our that's fun or anything going on that doesn't fit into our other segments, Adam?
Not for me. I'm ready for news. There's so much news to talk about.
All right, well, let's jump into the news then.
Well, you want the bad news or the really bad news?
Okay, Adam. So the first piece of news we have here is J.J. Abrams talking about the Rise of Skywalker, and as we saw in the Last Jedi, we kind of got some new Force abilities, different ways the Force is being used. What comes to mind for me the most is kind of the idea of Force projection and being able to project yourself onto a different a different location, and even Yoda interacting with the physical environment with lightning and everything. um
Yeah,
so
yeah. I mean, force projection wasn't brand new
no,
at that point,
right,
but yeah, when we start getting into this, like brand new abilities make me a little nervous.
yeah, it
But
does.
yeah, go ahead and
Sure, sure. Well, what JJ said here was it was really important that we not just redo the things you've seen, but add new elements, which we know will infuriate some people and thrill others. And Abrams said this to Vanity Fair. So, Adam, what are your thoughts on force abilities? What force abilities do you want to see slash don't want to see in the Rise of
oh
Skywalker?
boy, I don't know. I mean, like without sounding too crotchety, like I'm kind of okay where we're at right now.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you know, magic or what equates to magic in these types of stories kind of has to have a set kind of has to have its own boundaries, has to have rules.
Right.
And adding rules and adding new parts, I mean, it's fun, but it can also lead to some problems when you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to tell other stories, new stories, things like that.
Sure.
It can also lead to some inconsistencies with stories you've already told. So, there's always been this talk about force healing and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
which it creates some inconsistencies. That if force healing is something that ever gets introduced, why couldn't Anakin force heal himself with how strong he was? Why did he need the suit? That type of thing.
Right.
So I don't know. It- I really can't think of anything else that I want to add, to be
Fair
honest.
enough. Um, you bring up force healing, which I think is interesting because I think it's possible that we could see that. For two reasons. One reason is Baby Yoda, and
Mm-hmm.
it
Yeah,
it really looked like he was
it
trying
really
to
did.
heal the Mandalorian, and maybe that's teasing that ability a little
Could
bit.
be. Yeah.
Um, the other thing and how it could tie into the story and be more, I guess, plausible is Rey has the Jedi texts, which were kind of lost for a long time until Luke found them. Um, so maybe that ability is in there somewhere, and it ties
Yeah.
into the story that way.
Yeah, that's
Um,
possible too.
and you could, make the argument for that. Now, do I want to see healing necessarily? If they didn't have healing in it, I'd be good.
Yeah,
If they
same.
have it,
Yeah.
if they have it in there and they can tie it
Right.
in that way or something, then I'd be okay with it. But you're right. It's kind of one of those tricky things where
Yeah.
you don't want it. It doesn't feel like the characters are in peril.
Yeah,
If they can be
that's the other
healed.
thing is it kind of takes away some of that suspense, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you definitely have to be careful
Yeah,
with what
and we're
you
talking about
do.
force healing specifically, and like that's
Hmm.
come up recently because of Baby Yoda and things like that. But even
Right.
beyond force healing, I don't think that there's really not much else I really want to bring into the universe. I don't think.
Sure. Now, the only other thing that I've been bringing up for weeks now is the idea of expanding upon the force connection that Rey and Kylo have, and
Okay.
if
Okay.
somehow they can connect in an
Yeah.
even
No, I mean in like a telekinesis, well, maybe not telekinesis, but
sort of like a teleportation type of ability, I guess.
like factual
Um,
physical moving planets or just visions.
actually, physically, traveling to another planet through the force.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't
I
know.
don't
I
really
don't
want
know.
to see that, but I think
I
we
really don't either, to be honest with you.
I think we could, but I
Well,
don't
I
know if
think
I
part of
want
that
to.
was, yeah, I think part of that was hinted at in Last Jedi with, I
Right.
guess, when they do these things and uh, Kylo comes back with the water on his glove and that type of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
I
So
just I
that's
just
why I
don't know how
think
I feel
because that was
about
hinted
that. I
at.
mean, that's kind of like,
Hmm.
I think for me again, that's like a step beyond what I'd like to see.
Right.
It's a little much, I guess.
Now, one thing that I wouldn't mind seeing, and this is actually going a little bit into my predictions for Rise of Skywalker, I wouldn't mind seeing Force Ghosts being able to interact with the environment a little bit more, especially when it comes to
Okay.
Luke, because I think if Luke did something really powerful with the Force in this movie in kind of a physical way, I think it might land with some fans that might have been disappointed with the Last
Yeah,
Jedi.
yeah, that'd be interesting.
Um,
And I mean,
one thing in
Yoda influenced the world around him with that lightning
yeah,
strike, also.
right.
So maybe we've already seen the first
Yeah, it's not
element of that.
necessarily new,
Hmm.
but
Right.
one thing I thought of in particular was when I watched The Last Jedi again, I noticed once again that Luke's X-wing is in the water. um, and I can't help but think about Dagobah
Yeah.
when Luke wasn't able to raise the X-wing out of the water, but Yoda could.
Hmm.
Um, what if Luke was able to do that in this movie? You know what I mean? It's just kind of a thought I had today for some
Yeah.
reason.
Sure.
um,
The one thing I'd be
and
careful of with
yeah,
like Luke doing anything major is I also don't want that to lessen the story of the current the main three either, specifically Ray, I guess.
that's true. This is
So
very much about Rey and
right.
her journey, and that's a very good point.
So I
So you
think
don't want to
maybe if
minimize
anybody
that.
would raise that X-wing, and that could be either physically the X-wing or maybe symbolically, like doing
Hmm.
something else. I would maybe hope that would actually be Ray
Could be
and
Rey.
not
Yeah,
Luke.
yeah. So we'll see what happens with these Force abilities, and if we get new ones, and if you know, I'm just, I'm like anxiously awaiting seeing this movie because I'm so personally excited for it. But on the other hand, I'm like kind of so nervous about what
Nervous,
the
yeah.
fan reaction and response is going to be.
Yeah.
Um, but we'll see. We'll see what happens there. So, anything else you wanted to say about that article, Adam?
Nope. Good.
All right. Um, so our next one is Chris Terrio talks about bringing Palpatine back, and he kind of addresses the concern that will it in any way diminish what happened in Return of the Jedi with Anakin, Darth Vader being
Hmm.
redeemed, and the sacrifice of Vader. So what Terrio says here is he says, of course, the sacrifice of Vader at the end of Return of the Jedi and bringing balance to the Force, we still had to honor that. And I think we do honor that in the film. We don't take the end of Return of the Jedi lightly. And it goes on to say towards the bottom, we had to be careful about that. But if you look at some of the lore of Palpatine and the Sith and the way George has embedded ideas about the Sith into the mythology of Star Wars, there are ways the presence of that character can still cast its shadow in the future.
Right.
I guess I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
So what do you think? What do you think about this?
Part of that sounds like some of this inspiration came from Legends stuff to me,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm okay with. I never thought that
Yeah.
that really lessened Vader's sacrifice in the first place.
Right.
You know, because Palpatine came back way back when, and I don't think that that hurt anything back then.
No,
For me
no,
personally,
I would agree.
anyway. Maybe somebody
Yeah.
felt like that.
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't. It's not really something I've been that worried about, to be honest. I see the concern. Like I would never want Vader's sacrifice to be, because that's actually one of my favorite parts of the entire saga.
Absolutely.
Is the redemption story in
Mm-hmm.
6, and I love Anakin coming back, and I love I love that whole. So I would never want that to be tarnished. But I would. The interesting thing that it makes me think of, at least in the materials we've seen so far, is we haven't actually seen Palpatine in the flesh.
True. We have not.
So we don't quite know how he's back yet. If it's
Right.
flesh and bone type thing, or if it's something else.
Yeah, and
Or
I think
maybe
that's another thing we can get into when we our next
next.
recording when
Yeah,
we talk about our theories and
which is only a
predictions.
few days away.
A few days away, and I can't. That's again, I'm so looking forward to doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, Adam, I would say this doesn't bother me either because no matter what, that moment in Return of the Jedi, nothing for me is going to diminish that. I think that his sacrifice is always going to be a huge moment and a huge redemptive arc. So I don't think that this changes that. And I'm from the get-go, I've been so excited about Palpatine coming back. Like I think it's that the thing that for me brings the whole 9 films together.
Yeah, I agree.
Having that common enemy and that evil that's behind pulling the strings.
Right. Right.
I in the Skywalker family going up against that evil time and time again. So, I think for me, I'm really excited about it, and it's not going to diminish that for me. So
Yeah, I'm feeling the same.
So I'm with you. Our next story is the Rise of Resistance ride has opened in Orlando at Galaxy's Edge. And did you get a look at this ride at all, Adam?
No, I actually I did Disney stuff, but it was actually a cruise, so I wasn't really in any of the parks.
Gotcha.
There were some pretty cool things in the airport, and I showed you some of those. The tram in the Orlando airport that takes you from the gates to the main terminal was all decked out in first order garb. Like they had a wrap on it that made the terminal itself almost look like a troop transport, and then there were decals of first order stormtroopers on that. And then the main Disney store there had some real metal replica droids. One of BB-8 and one of an R2 unit, I believe.
Yeah. Well, the stuff you sent me was very cool.
Yeah. So I got to see some of that stuff. I didn't get to go to Galaxy's Edge or anything like that. That's
right.
Still on the horizon for me.
Have you seen anything online about it?
I have seen nothing but positive things about Resistance, the Rise of the Resistance ride, to the point where like people are praising this as being one of the best attractions down there of any attraction down there, which is saying a lot. The quality of Disney's rides is unmatched.
I've heard the same thing, and I think it kind of pulls in a lot of different types of rides into one.
Right.
Is something I've been hearing, and I did see some video online of the ride and everything, and
I've been debating really whether I want to YouTube it or not, and I might not.
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, Brittany and I did YouTube it just
Yeah,
because I can't help myself,
yeah,
as you can probably, as you know me by now,
right,
when it
yeah,
comes to this stuff. But I figured by the time I get to Galaxy's Edge, I will have forgotten a lot of what happens, and
yeah. That's fair.
experiencing
Yeah,
it in person will be, a new experience. But um, what I saw of it, I am very excited about, and I think it looks great. And
yeah.
actually, in September, my family will be going to Disney World and to Galaxy's Edge, so I'm pretty excited.
Oh, nice, nice. Um, so yeah, no, the one thing I did see was that Disney actually started limiting guest rides on that to one per day, which I think is a great move for them because Galaxy's Edge has been nothing but just crazy busy, and add on top of that Rise of Resistance launching, and I think it's perfectly fair. I mean, you don't want people jumping in for two, three, four rides when people are still struggling to get through the line once to get on it at all. So I think that was a pretty good move on their
I
part.
agree, and I'm hoping by the time I get there, it has died down a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
And I think this is kind of their tent pole ride and attraction,
Hmm.
as far as I can tell. So. Okay, so moving on to our last news story here, we had the announcement of a new game show coming to Disney Plus that is called Jedi Temple Challenge. Um, so, for some reason, Adam, the first thing that came to my mind is, are we getting Legends of the Hidden Temple in
That's
Star
exactly
Wars?
what I thought too.
Really? Did you think that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's just us growing up in that era with those '90s like Nickelodeon game show
Yeah,
stuff, but yeah, I hear kids game show and Temple. That's the first thing
yeah,
I think of is Legends of the Hidden Temple.
absolutely. Like, that's what I want this to be, because it
That'd be
had,
cool.
like, Legends of the Hidden Temple had
Going
elements
through like
of.
Jedi temples and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but with Jedi temples, and
Right.
like it had
Right.
elements of, like, didn't it have like questions you had to
Oh
answer in
yeah.
that,
Yeah. There was
and
trivia. There was
there was
like physical
trivia, but there was
challenges and
physical
yeah.
challenges, and then going through the temple.
Hmm.
Um, I think Star Wars. I think this show could do just that and be a really cool show to watch.
I
So,
would. Yeah. Yeah.
um, that's what I want it to be, and that's what I'm hoping for. But we'll see what it turns out to be.
Yeah.
Um, any more thoughts on Jedi Temple Challenge
No. No, I don't think so.
coming in 2020?
Awesome.
So I think we are ready to jump to our review segment of the show. Do you want to hit the cue for that, Adam?
My disappointment in your performance cannot be overstated.
Okay, so for our review segment this week, we'll be reviewing the novel Resistance Reborn, as well as Mandalorian Chapter 5. So, starting with Resistance Reborn, Adam, I just kind of wanted to go through some of my positives and some of my negatives. I think what
Okay.
you said a couple weeks ago about how my mind probably wouldn't change,
Yeah.
about how I felt about the novel. I think you were right about that. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah. I think
um,
I think about halfway point, you kind of get the flavor of what it's going to be.
yeah, and I do still feel like it's kind of a greatest hits of canon, which I think is a cool thing in a
Yeah.
way where it kind of brings together a lot of characters that we've seen in other stories and or even video games, um, into this and pulls it all together. Um, some of the things I really liked about this novel, number one, Poe's story. I think as far as characters go, like his story was my favorite.
Yeah.
Um, I think he again continues to go through this character arc of learning how to become a leader, learning from his mistakes and failures,
Yeah.
um, and just kind of there being those consequences for the decisions that he made in the Last Jedi.
Yeah.
Um,
This is a Poe
yeah,
story.
yeah,
Very
for
much
sure. I
overall.
think.
Yeah. This is Poe coming into his own.
Hmm. Definitely, and I mean, I like the little moments here and there that we got with Ray and Finn, but they were definitely not
Yeah.
as prevalent as Poe,
Yeah. Right.
in this story.
Right.
I
Yeah,
also
and Finn
go
actually
ahead.
had a little bit more of a bigger role than even Ray did.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
feel like Ray
I
was
would
just
agree.
kind of a supporting character, just kind of almost like a cameo, almost. Uh,
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think
yeah,
obviously she's going to be the central character in
right.
Rise of Skywalker, so that kind of makes sense to, you know.
Yeah, but yeah, again, Finn was just kind of a side character also.
Hmm.
Which makes me wonder what John Boyega would think about this book too.
Yeah, I know he was
Maybe he'd
kind of
be
iffy
a
on The
bit
Last
iffy on
Jedi.
this book too. Yeah.
Yeah, he might be a little iffy on this book.
Yeah.
I think John likes working with JJ.
I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah. So another thing I really liked about this book was kind of the mission of getting more ships for the Resistance and recruiting
Right.
Resistance members. I like that aspect of it because obviously that needs to happen in between
Yeah.
episodes 8 and 9.
Right.
So I like that aspect of it.
And like we had mentioned a few weeks ago, I don't know how much of that we'll see in Rise of Skywalker, which kind of makes me think that this is almost a necessary prelude
Yeah.
to that movie.
Yeah. I think we
I
could get
hope
a
it's not
little
too
maybe in the
jarring.
beginning.
Yeah, I hope it's not too jarring. Like,
Right.
we go from one ship with 40 people to kind of having a mini fleet,
Right. I don't think it'll be that
Right.
much of it. I don't think it'll be that dramatic. Like I think we will see a little recruiting possibly in the beginning, or
Yeah.
maybe a quick mission with Poe or something, and Finn maybe trying to get some Resistance members. Or maybe, who knows, some kind of rescue mission. I mean, we had the rescue mission in beginning of Return of the Jedi. Maybe with the poetry and rhyming of Star Wars, we'll get that with this one.
Yeah.
And I also like the idea of finding the list of allies that are kind of being that are prisoners. And maybe that being the reason.
I think that could come into play.
It could, and that being the reason they didn't answer Leia's call at the end of The Last Jedi.
I mean, I would almost hope that is part of the movie, because that was such a major piece of the ending of that movie. Was that no one came.
Right.
And you're led to believe that the galaxy doesn't believe anymore, and that's not true. What's true is that the First Order has put a stop to that. So I would hope that for the general public, that maybe doesn't read this book, that I hope they don't lean on that much, where they don't cover that at all in the movie.
Right. Because just to give the audience that information that, hey, these allies weren't rejecting the call. They just couldn't respond to the call.
Right.
And so it would be cool if we even, who knows, if they even had the list on the the Resistance base where they're at, that'd be kind of a nice nod to even integrating some of the canon stuff,
Yeah.
I also really liked Poe's speech at the end. I think that's what stuck with me the most.
Poe
because
has a couple great speeches in this.
He does.
And I listened to the audiobook. It was narrated by Mark Thompson, I believe, and who's done a lot of different Star Wars audiobooks. And actually kind of one of the, for me, kind of like one of the defining voices of Star Wars, actually, because I've listened to some of his other stuff before.
Yeah.
And kind of the performance that he puts into this, not just with Poe, but with others, but listening to those speeches in an audiobook format was just, I loved it.
Yeah, I'm sure it added a nice element to it that maybe I didn't get from just reading it, and it was, that speech he gave at the end was really reminiscent for me of what he says in the trailer for the Rise of Skywalker, and kind of the speech he's giving about how, others will fight if we lead them. There's good people that will kind of, I don't know what the exact quote is, but it reminded me of that.
Yeah.
And then one other thing I really liked was them getting the blockade runner, which I think we see a shot of that in the Rise of Skywalker trailer too, of the blockade runner kind of taking off from the planet that they're on. So I thought that was a cool little nod to that.
Yeah.
Now, do you have more positives that you want to share before we get into any of the negatives that I had?
I would just maybe respond to one of your earlier statements about this being the best of canon
Hmm.
thing, and you mentioned you kind of like that also. I actually really like that. I like seeing some of those characters, like Ransom Casterfo is one of the people that they
Yeah, yeah.
rescue. That's a callback to Bloodlines,
To Bloodline, yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Um,
Yep.
I like seeing all that. I like that we're kind of going back and getting in touch with these people that we've over 20 some years in canon timeline we've
Yeah.
lost touch with, and if it makes it feel, I guess to me, it makes it feel like a last ditch effort. We're going back to
Yeah.
whoever we can think of that might be on our side. We're going to try to find those people and bring them back into the story, and I
Yeah,
like
I
that.
think me too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it makes everything feel like a little more connected too. And I
Hmm.
think it's kind of similar to what they're doing with episode 9, where they're kind of pulling everything together in a last ditch effort too, and
Yeah.
making a
Yeah.
last stand,
Right.
um, and kind of even tying up together, not only in the story, but what the creators like JJ is doing is tying up all 9 films too.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I think it's cool that both the novel and the movie are kind of doing that,
Yeah. Definitely.
and so it almost has that kind of end game type of feel to it.
Right.
Um, Now, in terms of some of the negatives that I had, I think sometimes, and I don't know if this is just me, but I feel like sometimes certain things feel too much like our world at times, um,
Okay. Okay.
in the novel,
That's
and
actually one of the
just
complaints I had about Aftermath, and not
yeah,
so
yeah,
things feel a little bit too grounded in Earth language and Earth.
yeah,
You
and
know,
even certain moments in the Last Jedi felt like that, and I think
right?
you have to be careful with that because
Yeah, yeah,
Star Wars is tricky because you want to be able to connect with it, um, but you want it to exist in this other kind of galaxy, in this other world
yeah.
that's kind of like ours but not too much like ours. So it's a fine line. um, but some of the examples I had were just like the description of it's either Poe or Finn putting on a tie.
Okay,
To me
right.
that was just kind of weird. um or like Finn eating crab legs and Poe telling him he had to like crack them open. I know it was like a different kind of crab leg, but it was just
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
this feels a little like
That doesn't bother.
like
That
they're
didn't
going to
bother me
Red
so
Lobster.
much. Yeah,
Right.
I mean,
um
that didn't bother me so much. That's happened before. I like. I don't. I know you've read a good bit of the books, but there's always these little references to calf, which is
yeah,
it's just
calf,
coffee.
yeah,
You know,
yes,
so
yeah,
like I understand that complaint because you're not the first person to ever have that complaint, especially back
right.
in the EU days.
Hmm.
That's always been kind of a complaint, and that was one of the main complaints I had about Aftermath. Was
Right.
there's multiple references to things like moths, like
Yeah.
flying around.
Uh-huh.
What was the droid, Mr. Bones,
Yeah.
chasing around a moth a
Right.
couple different times, and so like just for me, just paint that picture, but give it a cool name, I
Yeah,
guess.
give it like a Star Wars name or
Yeah, yeah.
something, yeah.
Just don't just call them. That's just lazy, I guess.
Right.
In my mind, maybe it's not actually lazy, but in my mind, it feels a little lazy.
Yeah. So I think my least favorite storyline in the whole novel was kind of like the whole dinner party type thing.
Okay,
Um, I just
it
wasn't a huge fan of
felt a
that.
little bit uh Canto Bite
Yeah, if it
to
did,
me.
yeah, that's what it was. If
Yeah,
that's why I didn't like it. It felt very Canto Bite to me, which I did not like.
yeah,
Um, and the only other thing is, I just felt like, you know, and I think after Rise of Skywalker, some of the authors are going to have a little more freedom. But
I hope so. I hope so.
I feel like there's these inherent limitations in the storytelling. Like you can't make big things happen in these novels. Like game changing things are not going to happen. So I think it's always like a little bit limited. Like the storytelling's a little bit limited. The stakes aren't that high.
Yeah,
So I think that was kind of my only other
I am.
negative.
I have been thinking, and that's been one of my main complaints over the last 5 years now already.
Right.
With some of the new canon stuff is that it does feel like that. There's not always a lot in the line. We've been getting a lot of I don't know what to call it. I guess side stories or maybe
Yeah.
character studies in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
I do feel that complaint, and like I do feel like this has that problem a little bit. I guess for me, I
Right.
just kind of viewed it as like a kind of like like I said a prelude before, but it's kind of the same idea. And for me, it goes back to I remember when Revenge of the Sith came out, and I forget the name of the book off the top of my head, but there was a tie-in book that led up like right up to the events of Revenge of the Sith,
Mm-hmm.
and so you kind of like you knew when that book ended that these characters were not going to be dead or whatever, so
Right. Right.
there wasn't many high stakes there.
Mm-hmm.
I guess for me the best parts of this book are getting me in the right frame of mind for Rise of Skywalker, because there are some things in this book that I would have been in the wrong mindset for. Like we
Yeah.
talked last week about Leia, that Leia's actually pretty sick in this book,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I wouldn't have been ready for that because I felt like she was healing at the end of
Yeah, she was
Last
all right.
Jedi,
Yeah.
but she's very much not.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked just a little bit ago about getting the resistance together and bolstering the numbers.
Yep.
That would have been a lot to do in one movie that you're wrapping a lot of other stuff up in. So for me, I loved it just because it kind of moved that story along.
Yeah, I think it definitely succeeds when you look
Yeah,
at it in that, from that lens, from that perspective of what it's trying to do, and I think it definitely succeeded with
yeah.
that.
Now, like you said
Um,
before, after Rise of Skywalker, I really hope that some of these books get a little bit more, kind of develop the timeline a little bit more, develop the universe a little bit more. I want to see a
yeah,
lot more stuff with New Republic, with
right.
Jedi Temple, with Ben
Hmm.
Solo, with all that stuff, and then
Yeah,
post Rise of Skywalker, I want to see some pretty big events and series that give us new threats to deal with these characters.
definitely.
Because
And
and to be honest, I don't know after this movie, I don't know what we're gonna see as far as Poe and Finn and Ray on screen again.
yeah, I mean, it could be a long time, if ever,
If ever,
that
right?
that we get them back on screen. So, you can
So
either
I want
fill
to,
in
yeah.
those gaps, in the timeline, or you can go post at 9 or prior to episode
Hmm.
1. So
Oh
there's
yeah, yeah. You can go
some
either
different
way,
ways to
right?
go.
I mean, I
Um,
keep thinking about EU with like New Jedi Order and all that stuff that happened
mhm,
all post six, and
yeah,
I want to see the same type of thing. Not the same stories, but I want to see the same ideas that we're going to develop this universe beyond the last movie.
yeah, I definitely want there to be the establishment of a new, Jedi Order of some type.
Yeah, and
Um,
not even just Jedi Order, but like I want to get back into the government stuff, build
mhm,
up the New Republic again. I want to see how that
yeah,
takes place without Leia. Uh, that type of stuff.
right,
Those are the types of stories that I want to see, and I hope that we get that after this
yeah.
movie.
And I'll tell you what I'm really excited to see is coming out soon is Charles Soule's comic, The Rise of Kylo Ren,
Yes,
and
yes,
looking at Ben Solo's turn and the Knights of Ren and all that stuff. I think that'll be the first true test of the freedom that they have post episode 9 of what the kind of stories they can tell.
right, right.
um, there was one question that I was kind of left with at the end of this novel, which was, are we going to see Wedge in The Rise of Skywalker? Because it kind of
I don't think
sounded
so.
like he was pretty much done,
I think that was kind of his retirement there.
Yeah, I would agree. Um, Now, if I had to give a score to this novel, at first I was kind of leaning towards a 7 out of 10, but
Okay.
with some of the stuff that happened at the end and and how it led into how it's kind of leading into episode 9 and post speech at the end, it really bumped it up for me to a 7.5. So
Okay.
that's where I land with
I'd be more in
Resistance
the
Reborn.
8 range. Like I said before, I really enjoyed this book. I love Poe's story. I love a lot of the stuff that happened in this. So I'd be more in the 8
Mhm.
8 range. It's not
Great.
perfect. We
No,
talked
but
about just now. There's some parts that aren't the best, but I think overall it's a really good read.
yeah, there's a lot to enjoy here, and I think it's definitely like I don't want to say mandatory reading, like, but it's definitely going to help going into episode 9.
Yeah.
So I would definitely recommend it.
I'll say it. If you want to know really what's going on, this is mandatory reading.
Fair enough.
If you don't want to say it.
I didn't want to, but you did, so that's good.
That's why.
Jumping into The Mandalorian Chapter 5.
Yeah, let's do it. And we're not going to do any. This is all spoilers from here on out.
Yes. So you've been given your spoiler warning at this point.
I mean, this episode's been almost a week old by the time we're recording this, so.
Yeah, so I think we can go ahead and talk about this one freely.
Yeah.
The title of Chapter 5. Do you recall the title of this one?
It was The Gunslinger.
Gunslinger, that's right.
Yeah.
So, I've been complaining for a while and been grumpy for a while that we haven't gone back to a familiar planet in Star Wars recently.
Yeah.
Why wasn't that one planet Tatooine? Why aren't the Death Star remains on Endor? I've been grumpy, but I was so excited that we were going back to Tatooine
Finally
in this episode. Like, I was pumped.
It's not Jakku. It's not Arvala 7. It's finally Tatooine.
Yeah. And I loved every bit of seeing Mos Eisley again.
And this is what I wanted to mention from earlier. I'm tired of just creating the same planet over and over again.
Yeah.
That looks the same with the same creatures and the same aliens, and just calling it something different.
Right.
I'm finally happy that we're just back on a planet that we know.
Agreed. So I'm right there with you, and it was cool seeing the cantina again. Looks like there's some new ownership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whether or not it was the same exact cantina, I'm not sure, but
it was.
What do you think?
Yeah, it's supposed to be the same exact cantina.
Okay.
And that's actually where we meet Toro, and I know we haven't got there yet, but that's actually the same exact booth that Han was sitting in.
Awesome.
Him in episode 4.
And I think it was interesting that there was a droid that was like the bartender.
And it was interesting. I forget what podcast I was listening to, but it kind of shows how the world has changed since the original trilogy,
Right.
Because droids weren't allowed in that establishment back then. But now they're running the place, and it's like it's like the same presences that were there back then, like the humans have left.
Yeah.
Or dead, I don't know. But
something. But we got droids running the place where droids weren't allowed to be before.
Yeah, it shows how the world has changed.
Mm-hmm. I also thought the speeder bikes, all that stuff was pretty cool. There was some cool action.
Really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Just seeing those things fly across the desert and how that was done with the effects and all that. I thought that was really nice.
Very reminiscent of Return of the Jedi, obviously, just not in the forest, but on desert,
and not as obvious green screen, and not even like Anakin's speeder bike ride in episode 2.
Right. Yeah, it definitely looked great.
Yeah.
And I love the whole action scene of first of all there being a sniper out there and using the flash grenades to kind of get to her. I thought that was an interesting tactic, and I like that whole action scene of getting to the sniper.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that.
And the humor was great the whole way through here, because there was a lot of things that I just laughed out loud at. And I was watching this. I was down in Florida in a hotel, and I was watching this with headphones on. And I'm just sitting there laughing, and my wife is staring
looking at you like, what are you laughing about? What's wrong with
you? So backtracking a little bit,
when
Mando and Toro are searching for their bounty, and I'm drawing a blank on her name. That was the Ming-Na Wen character.
Yeah.
But they come across the Tusken Raiders, which is cool to see Tusken Raiders again. First,
Yeah, I forgot about that.
having
That
to
was cool.
having to play with having to pay to cross their land with the binocs.
Mm-hmm.
And Toro objects and says that was new. And
Yeah.
yeah, it was. But that, and then what reminded me of that was when you were talking about the sniper shot, and Toro says that, yeah, I'm not wearing Beskar.
Right. That
Nope.
was funny. Yeah.
Yeah. But just that type of humor, and this is another Dave Filoni episode.
Yeah.
Directed this, so that's kind of the humor that I expect with Dave Filoni, and it was perfect for me.
Yeah. I liked it as well, and there was even like a mention of, like her having the
she
high
has
ground.
the high ground, yeah.
Yeah. So there
Yeah.
was, a lot. Dave Filoni obviously
But a lot
knows
of
and loves
callbacks.
Star Wars.
Yeah, that being a callback with the high ground, but then was it Beggar's Canyon? The Dune Sea got a
Yeah.
mention.
Dune Sea was mentioned. I think even
Was it
Beggar's
at
Canyon
the
might
end?
have been mentioned as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
was the line that Amy Sedaris was the lady that played the, I don't know what I want to call her, but she was the one that was in the
Yeah.
hangar,
Right.
was fixing up the ship.
Yeah. So I think there was
Fennec Shand was Ming-Na Wen's
Okay.
character.
That's right. I just liked having a new story being told in a familiar place.
Mhm.
I think that was pretty cool. And did you have any negatives about this episode?
When I first talked to you, I mentioned that this was maybe one of my least favorite episodes, but I've watched it a few more times since then, and I think that's changing.
Yeah.
And not that I didn't like it the first time I saw it, but I've had some more time to think about what's going on here, and I think that there's
Right.
actually a lot of really good subtle things that I probably missed the first time around.
Yeah, I've only have watched it once, so I do need to go back and watch it again, and I'm sure we'll get together,
Yeah.
on Friday and watch that one again, because I don't think our other buddies have seen it maybe yet.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I'm hoping to watch it again, and I'm starting to think more and more like I think I'm going to appreciate this show even more when we are, and I love the format of not binging it, but I think being able to see it as a whole
Back to back
piece
to
of
back,
work,
yeah.
because I think there's this thing happening where people are kind of judging each episode as it should stand on its own, but and comparing it to the other episodes and stuff like that, which is something I do too, but
Yeah.
I think this is a show that's really meant to be seen as a whole.
Yeah.
And
there was a thread that I retweeted on Twitter from Phil Zostak, I believe is how you say his name, but he's a creative art director at Lucasfilm, and the main point that he was getting across, and this came up with this episode because this does feel like a filler episode.
Yeah.
But he was talking about how it's become common lately to start talking down, or he says denigrating certain TV episodes as filler.
Yeah.
But what he says is I'll just read this whole thing. Not every chapter of a story needs to advance the overarching plot. Quieter episodes, which enrich your understanding, love of the characters and worlds, make the latter ones that much more impactful. Was the entirety of Star Trek: The Next Generation or any pre-serialized TV show filler? To a certain extent, I blame binge watching and online spoiler culture for making TV viewing more about racing to find out what happens next and lore accumulation instead of relaxing and enjoying the journey. He says he brings up Next Generation not as an example of a show with filler, but as a show that, by definition above, is entirely filler. Like every single episode, since it resets every single episode outside of a handful of episodes, which I think that nails it. Like,
yeah, I think he makes some really good points.
Yeah, like this episode again has that side mission feel, but there's a lot of things happening in this episode that are very important. Um, you see the Mandalorian learning a lot through this series,
Yeah.
and I know that the podcast. I know the name of this one that I was listening to. This was the Force Cast that was talking about this
Mm-hmm.
episode, and some of the points that they brought up on there were excellent. About you think back to episode, it was episode 2 with the Jawas, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So back then, the Mandalorian is not into negotiating. He, his idea of negotiations are aggressive negotiations.
Yeah. Yeah. Aggressive negotiation.
With a flamethrower,
Yeah.
not a lightsaber.
Right.
But
Absolutely.
we totally see that change by
Yeah.
this episode. By episode 5, he's wheeling and dealing with the Tusken
Mm-hmm.
Raiders to get past. He's not just gonna cook them to a crisp. He's doing different things to figure out how to do this, and some of that's actually called out directly by Amy Sedaris.
Mm-hmm.
Character's name is Peli Motto.
Okay.
When he leaves the child on board, he obviously doesn't know how to take care of a kid, because he leaves the child on board thinking he's just going to sleep there. Before we saw him talk to it like a dog, like
Mm-hmm.
sit, stay, don't
Yep.
get off. But that doesn't work. So we're gonna. I would imagine that we're gonna see him adapt to that later. So you're seeing him progress through this whole thing, and you're seeing the changes that he's been going through since this all started happening.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's all kind of necessary. It's all
Mhm.
essential to understanding the character, and character development is so. Yeah, you're going to have some episodes like that in any series that might look or feel like filler, but they're really pushing the story forward in different ways.
Right.
If I guess to look at some of the negatives I had.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if I had a main negative, it'd probably be Toro Calican as a character. It wasn't my favorite.
Was that
That was the perspective bounty hunter.
Okay. I didn't mind him too much. I actually felt like the woman, and you'll have to help me out with her name, that was in Mos Eisley, that was caring for Baby Yoda.
Oh yeah, Amy Sedaris. That was Peli Motto. Yeah, that was the.
I felt like she seemed
name.
slightly out of place for some reason. There was something about her that just felt a little off to me, or out of place. But yeah, I think that was.
Yeah, I can see that.
And
I felt that way at first too. I think, and even after a couple watch throughs, I kind of feel the same. It felt a little bit out of place.
Right. I'm not a major complainer, just minor. But
again, I think going back to like what we were talking about with the droids in the cantina, it kind of shows how things have changed on Tatooine since then.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the same type of clientele that's in charge anymore.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And maybe some of the crime syndicates have left. Like we heard that the guild is no longer operating there. So some of that cutthroat style attitude that was present there in 4 and even 6 is just not there anymore.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I think too, if I had any other negatives, it would be I couldn't believe that he left Baby Yoda on the ship.
Yeah,
but that's a character choice. I mean, it's
right.
I don't know if I can have really a gripe with that, but I was like, really? You're gonna leave Baby Yoda? You know what happens when you do that,
right? And I thought he was a little bit like freewheeling with him when Toro came back with the speeders. Like, he was just out in the open and lets Toro see him, and that causes problems later.
Yeah, so I was kind of surprised about that. And I felt like, while again, it's like you said, it's all essential to the storytelling. I felt like this was okay. We kind of have another detour here towards the main story and the main thing that's happening here. But it's all for the sake of character development and the character learning different things. So I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So any other thoughts on Mandalorian Chapter 5?
No, I don't think so.
All right, fantastic. Well, are you ready to jump into the points of view segment?
Yeah, let's do it.
Luke, you're going to find that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view.
Okay, so for our points of view section this week, the one idea that I had to talk about was to kind of cover Rise of Skywalker marketing up until, we're only a week away from watching this movie,
Yeah, that's
and
insane.
yeah, and I kind of want to just kind of touch base and see what we both thought about how this has been marketed so far. We've talked a couple weeks ago about how the floodgates have opened, and they definitely have opened.
Yeah.
Between cast interviews and clips and trailers and TV spots and just everything. We've
More TV spots.
this is prime Star Wars marketing right here. So I
Mhm.
want to take a break, and then next week we're going to talk about what we think is going to happen in the movie. But I think this is the perfect week to kind of talk about how it's been presented to us so far. So the first thing I wanted to talk about here is, what do you think, Josh? Do you think marketing has been on the money? Do you think it's been too much? Do you think it's maybe been not enough? What are you feeling here?
I mean, I think it is just enough, bordering on too much. But for me, I'll take it all. Like I I love it
Okay.
because
Okay.
this is what I get. This is what excites me is, and I'm not gonna experience this again probably for a long time, if ever. But the excitement I'm feeling right now, and like seeing a new TV spot and seeing a cast interview, and just the excitement I get from taking in all this stuff and the anticipation and the build up, leading to a Star Wars movie
Yeah.
in the Skywalker saga. Like for me, there's nothing like it. There's no other movie out there that I get as excited for as a Skywalker saga movie.
Yeah.
And so I'm enjoying it. I'm taking it all in. I'm watching everything. I'm not gonna lie. So but even me, like I've started to reach the point where I'm like, should I take a little break from this and not check out so much of this stuff? I'm
Yeah.
contemplating that because it is getting to that point where I'm like, okay, I want to be a little fresh going in to the movie, but I love it. So that's me.
Yeah. So for me, I think it's a little too much, and I don't mean that like in a bad way, like they're doing anything wrong. Like I think this is the
Mhm.
exact same thing that we would have seen uh, a few years ago with Last Jedi, and then also definitely with Force Awakens.
Force Awakens, yeah.
So I don't think that it's much different, to be honest, but it feels like it's too much for me at this point. And
Hmm.
we talked earlier today. We were messaging about the score came out,
Yeah.
and asked if you were if I just you asked if I was going to listen to it, and I just said I'm not.
Right.
There's some things I'm at the point now where I don't want to see anything else, and I want to experience the rest of it next Thursday,
Hmm.
and that definitely includes the score for me. I definitely don't want to hear the score until I see
Right.
it with the movie, and then after it, I'll go back and I'll listen to the score and separately and things like that. But I definitely want to see that stuff in the theater now. I'm at that point where I'm good, you know.
Yeah. And I can definitely respect that. And I think for me, like, this is what tends to happen. The first time I see a movie, especially a Star Wars movie, I'm completely overwhelmed by the experience to the point where I don't even know when I walk out of the theater, I never know really how I felt about it the first time I see it.
Yeah,
It's happened with almost every Star Wars movie I've seen. Um, with the exception maybe of like the original trilogy movies.
hmm,
But for me, it's just a lot to process. Like I hardly even hear the score the first time I see a movie. So for me, like I kind of like to have a vague idea going in of what the sights and sounds are going to be, like what
hmm,
the main story points might be. I like having a little bit of that in my mind going in, so it's not quite as overwhelming to me that first time that I see it. For me, the second viewing is always almost always my favorite, just because at that point, okay, I know it's coming, and now I can really sit down and enjoy what it is. And so I hear you, but I also, for me, the way I kind of take in movies, for me, I kind of like having a little bit of that. And
Yeah.
you are a true Jedi when it comes to not giving into the temptation of the dark side of listening to the score. I did give into that temptation, and I listened to it through one time. There weren't any titles or anything, and I don't even know if
that's
they
what I
were.
heard. Yeah, that there were. Yeah, it wasn't named.
I don't know if it was in chronological order or not.
Okay.
I will say that what I heard for me didn't like make me, it didn't spoil anything for me.
Okay.
I really liked what I heard, and there were some familiar themes in there and stuff, and then some kind of new stuff, but I really enjoyed it.
I
and
think for me, it's the soundtrack is just something I like to experience the first time with a movie, just to kind of see it
that makes sense
in its element, I guess, because
Yep.
the soundtrack is really the main complementary thing for me with the film. So I kind of like to see those together hand in hand first time around.
Yeah, it was kind of weird for me actually listening to the score with no context for what was happening on screen.
Yeah, I could see that.
So it was a little weird. So it'll be interesting to listen to it again when I have context.
Yeah. So the next thing, and we might have to break this down a little bit between an answer for us and an answer for everybody else. But what do you think of the effectiveness so far of the marketing you've seen across everything, TV spots, all cast interviews, all that stuff? Has it been effective? So let's look at this two ways. So let's just separate it down this way first. Do you think that this has been an effective marketing campaign for the Star Wars fan base as a whole?
Versus.
We'll do the verses later.
Okay.
Let's talk about the fan base, like the people that are really interested in this movie.
Okay. Like us.
Like us, the people that wouldn't have needed marketing to know that this was coming.
Sure. I mean, I think for me, again, I dive so deep into this stuff that I want all of it, and I, now, would I still see the movie if I didn't see all this stuff? Absolutely. But for me, it's more about the excitement that it creates for me and the anticipation, like I said before. So for me, I think it's really effective because I like to see all this stuff.
What do you think about? Oh yeah, for me, it was fun. Like I wouldn't have needed anything.
Sure.
What do you think about some of the more negative? I don't want to say more negative. What do you think about some of the fans that weren't as thrilled with Last Jedi? Do you think that this may have reached them a little bit?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I think there's a few things going on too that are in Star Wars' favor right now. I think the Mandalorian is one of them.
Yeah,
I think
for sure.
the Rise of Resistance ride is another. I think Fallen Order is. I think Star Wars is getting a lot of wins right now. I think that's getting people back on board that weren't on board for The Last Jedi. But when it comes to the Rise of Skywalker, specifically the marketing, I think just throwing it out there right from the get-go that Palpatine is back, the Emperor's back in some way, hopefully got some of those fans on board. But I think all the marketing is kind of, I think they're very aware of the Last Jedi backlash, and I think they knew.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah,
I think they knew the marketing would have to be on point for this movie to win some people back, and I think they've done a good job of doing it. I feel like they might be marketing even a little bit more for this one than they normally have for the other ones. So.
What do you think about for like the casual Star Wars fan, or maybe the people that just kind of know what Star Wars is? Do you think that this marketing is really getting to them?
I mean, I think obviously the box office is going to tell us whether it's been effective or not. But in my opinion, like I think people are seeing this stuff, whether it's in the theater going to see Frozen 2, whether it's during halftime of a Monday Night Football game, whether it's just they're watching their shows, they're seeing this stuff. Like just people I've been around, a lot of people were talking about it that maybe normally
Yeah.
wouldn't. And I think there's excitement for it. And from my point of view, I think it's been effective for the general
Yeah.
movie-going audience.
I would agree, and like I think it goes back to what's happening with the Mandalorian about how Star Wars has always been a pop culture thing,
Hmm.
but it's even more so now with
Yeah, it
how much
is.
the Mandalorian has reached everybody. Uh, so I think it's just kind of maybe like a perfect storm for them.
It
Where
really is. I
yeah,
think the timing is right. And if this movie gets positive buzz, if this movie is well, at least decently received critically, and especially if it's really well received from the fan base, I think that's the most important thing. Um, then this thing could have long legs. It could make a
hmm
lot of money. It could be very successful, and it could be just the right time and what Star Wars needs.
yeah. And what do you think about some of these some of these things? Specifically, I'm going to talk here about Fortnite. Did you see this the Fortnite crossover?
I did not see that, so you'll have to tell me
I,
about that one
I
because
didn't
I'm not
watch it.
too
It's
familiar
okay.
with Fortnite stuff.
So a few weeks ago, and I used to play Fortnite, but I haven't played it in probably about a year
Hmm.
now. So I wasn't going to take part in this anyway because it's actually a scene that hasn't been shown yet, and they were going to show this in game in a I guess it's like an in-game event. But they've
Hmm.
done some little things like this before. They've done an in-game concert with
Yeah.
Marshmallow a little while ago. So lately, a few weeks ago, they actually had a Star Wars event where you could get like a skin for your character, like a stormtrooper skin.
Okay.
So this past week, it was announced that they were going to actually premiere a never before seen clip of the movie in game.
Hmm.
I'm not going to watch that because I don't want to download Fortnite again just to do that, and
Right.
when it's going to be on YouTube instantly anyway.
True.
And B, like I said before, I'm just done at this point. I don't want to see anything else. What do you think about stuff like that? Like that's a very different way to reach people.
I think they're
And
being really.
I have
I
mixed
think they're
feelings
being
about
really
it. But go
smart.
ahead. Yeah.
I think they're being really smart. I mean, I
Okay.
think they're incorporating a lot of different marketing strategies. You know, taking a lot of different approaches to it. You know, whether it's again with something as popular as Fortnite, I think that's really going to hit the maybe even the younger demographic a little bit. Um, and then looking too at um, the Mandalorian and having a special look on Disney Plus coming up on next week's episode of the Mandalorian too.
hmm
Um, so I think they're being pretty smart with it.
One thing that I thought about while I was putting this together, I would love to see on Disney Plus a behind the scenes, like a half an hour behind the scenes special.
Yeah, that'd be
Like I
awesome.
don't know if you remember back when, but I remember, when I was a kid and movies were coming out and things like that. Usually, like on ABC or something, prior to the launch of a
Hmm.
movie, there would be like this half-hour special, like a behind-the-scenes special. And I remember that for Jurassic Park. I remember that for some other things. I would love
Yeah,
to see that on Disney Plus. I think that's a perfect.
absolutely.
I think that's a perfect thing for them to do. And
That
like,
makes me think of, and I don't know if it was HBO or one of the premium channals had like an inside look at an upcoming movies, and they'd be like 15 minutes long, and it's
yeah,
going behind
yeah,
the scenes and it's just like stuff like that. That'd be great on Disney Plus. I'd love to see that.
yeah. So yeah. Overall, I would say that the marketing has been overwhelming to a point.
Aggressive
It has
comes to
been
mind.
aggressive. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It
And
can it can be it could be too much,
I
at
don't
times.
know if it's because we're already so deep into this as fans.
Right.
So I don't know if maybe like the general person
They
that
might not
is
feel that way. We're
yeah,
kind of
right.
engrossed in it as we're doing a podcast and we're so into it and everything.
Yeah, because for me, like every time I turn around, there's something brand new to look at. Like it's like every time I
Mhm.
refresh Twitter, there's something new,
Yep.
and it's like I just let me have 5 minutes, please. you know.
Right.
Um.
I hear you.
So yeah, overall, I think it's been aggressive, but I think it's been effective also. And I don't know if that's how you'd classify it as well, but
Yeah. I think both. I think it's been a
Yeah.
little bit on the aggressive side, but probably hopefully effective for those that dive deep into Star Wars and the casual fan as well. So
Have you had a
yeah.
chance to listen to any of the cast interviews and stuff lately?
Yes, I have.
There's been some interesting stuff come out of that. We mentioned the
Yeah,
John Boyega thing earlier. Uh,
yeah.
he doesn't really mince words,
No, he doesn't.
which is interesting to put that out there before before the movie comes out.
That is an interesting choice, and I don't know if he maybe he feels like Finn's definitely done, and he doesn't have to worry about them signing him again,
Yeah,
and like,
I
he's
don't
kind of
know.
saying things
Right.
about the Last Jedi. But I know he was probably unhappy with his character arc in the Last Jedi, and as a lot of people were.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
and I also think just my feeling from Daisy Ridley is the vibe I'm getting from her is that she's just kind of done with Star Wars, at least for now. And I think she's had enough of the fan base, the toxic portion of the fan base. Just that's just kind of the impression I get from some of the things that she's kind of been saying. You know.
Yeah, and it sounds like Oscar Isaacs is pretty much done also.
Yeah, I mean, I know they aren't really interested in doing anything on Disney Plus. Um, is what I'm hearing too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like they asked him specifically about coming back for a Disney Plus series, and
Mm-hmm.
like not even just for the Disney Plus. It sounded like that the quote that he used, I think, was he was cashing in his chips.
Right. Yeah.
He was done for a while, and I don't know if maybe that's just something like maybe some time would, some time away
Could
from that
change
could
that. I
change
mean,
that. But I mean,
because we probably thought Harrison Ford specifically, but Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher would never come back to do Star Wars again for a long
hmm
time. But
yeah,
eventually that did happen. So you never know what the future might hold. But right now it looks like this story is done
yeah,
with nine. You know.
yeah. So yeah, either way, we've got one more week of this. I think we can make it through one more week, but that'll wrap
Yeah.
up the marketing, and then we're into the premiere.
Yeah. I can't wait. I'm getting so excited. I'm so excited to do our next podcast where we
Yeah,
just spend a whole episode on the Rise of Skywalker and theories and predictions, and I'm excited for that one. So
yeah. Well, yeah, you ready to wrap up episode 6?
yeah, let's wrap it up.
I'm just glad you're here. At the end.
Okay, well, thank you for again for joining us from a certain point of view. We hope you enjoyed episode 6. Once again, we'd like to point you to our website, FromACertainPointOfView.com. There hasn't been a whole lot going on over there the last week or so, with vacations and all kinds of other stuff going on. But we will be kicking that back into gear. And again, we are on Twitter at Certain POV Pod, and the Facebook group is From a Certain Point of View as well. There's always conversations going on there, as well as in Discord. And the link for Discord, as well as all of the socials, Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff, it's always in the show notes. You can always find it there, and also on the website as well. So, but once again, thank you all for joining us. Sorry this episode came out a little bit late, but we're getting back on schedule, so we're pretty excited to get back into the swing of things.
That's right, and thank you everyone. And until next time, the Force will be with you.
Always.